Welcome to our PwC CFO Insight podcast series. As ever, I'm your host, Roel Boons, and today we have a special episode on reward and especially why it triggers the attention not only from the HR department, but why it should also attract the attention of the finance department as well as the CFO in particular. To explore this topic, I've invited two guests from our reward practice within PwC Belgium. First, we have Bart van der Busche. Hello, Bart.
Hi, Roel.
A partner at our rewards team, and Maxime Duimling. Hey, Maxime.
Hello.
Hey. A senior manager in the same practice. Now, Bart and Maxime, you have, along with your team, very recently contributed to a comprehensive book, the reward book, where you delve into compelling reward strategies aimed at really attracting and retaining key talent within organizations. So I'm very happy to have both of you here as experts. And today, as we already spoke, we will be discussing a few of the key insights from your work and focus especially deeper on the very up and coming EU Pay Transparency Directive. So I'm very happy to have you here. Perhaps Bart, starting off with you. Really, what did motivate you as a co-author to write the book and provide a bit of high-level content, perhaps?
First of all, Roel, thank you for having me in this beautiful studio in Antwerp. So, and also giving us the floor to indeed tell a bit more about our book. One of the reasons that we started writing this book is that we found that not such a book existed already in the Belgian market, but even broader. So if we have a unique book in the market and it's normally accessible for every profile. So you should not only be an HR or complement professional, certainly interesting for this audience as well. But we know that if you talk about reward, everybody is interested. So certainly accessible and not only focusing specific on Belgium, so it has a broader focus as well. Okay. Perhaps also, I can already share a bit a sneak preview is that we also handle, I would say, why now this book, that not only because it does not exist, but we see as well that the world is changing. So we see a lot of new trends, new business models. Therefore, also in the book, we reflect on what's the impact of certain mega trends, for instance, climate change, more, I would say, technological disruption. What is now the impact on reward and on this changing models? And to give some examples, of course, we all know we have moved to more remote work. There's an increased focus on pay transparency, where we come later in this podcast. So there you see everything is in motion. So that makes it really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that I also can say, I think the book is really user-friendly. Yeah, so we have, I can say, three key building blocks. So the first part of the book really focus, okay, what is a reward for employee, what it needs for employee, what it needs for an employer, also what the drivers, and making the link with the mega trends as that also said it. Then we have a second part of the book where we really focus on how you can build a reward strategy within your organization, and where we start really from the scope, then to job architecture benchmarking, then selecting the right mix between of the reward components, and then also understanding the impact of change in the structure of your organization. And then lastly, the final part of the book covers some specific topics, like, for example, the new EU Pay Transparency Directive. So if I also may add, I think the book is really a valuable resource for professionals, so that they can look at their current reward strategy within the organization. And what is the benefit of a good reward structure is, on the one hand, it can help organization to retain and attract employees. That can also help, like the finance department, in controlling costs, better forecasting expenses, but also from an HR perspective, doing benchmarking exercises, and also promoting transparency with employees.
Yeah, I agree with Maxime, because I think the intention is as well in terms of messaging, so always giving more in terms of financial costs. That is not sustainable. So we look at also from a different angle.
Okay, so not only looking at the total costs, but also just how you change the reward model in itself. Perhaps just digging a bit deeper already into that. some of the trends that you see in the market. Perhaps good to talk about that.
Yes, yes. So the trends, I think, we touched upon already. So well-being at work is definitely a trend. So where employers are more focusing on the well-being of their employees. For example, promoting healthier lifestyles or well-being sessions about burnout. Further, what I also can say about well-being is also aligned to our PwC vision, where we make the switch from a total reward to concept to a total well-being concept. So what does it mean? So the typical total rewards approach is where we start from financial rewards, and on top you have your non-financial benefits. And the total well-being approach really starts from the employee. So it's really a bottom-up approach. That we focus on where we will tailor the reward to the employee's needs and taking into account the 6 well-being dimensions like financial, physical, emotional, career, mental, and social. I will not go further into these in the 6 dimensions, but what I want to highlight here is what is important for organization is that they need to be aware that employees want to work for companies that that give attention to their employees' well-being.
I think from finance perspective, if you have less absenteeism, if you have people that are more motivated, it will have an impact also directly or indirectly on improvement of your cost, and you put your people first. So I think it's a very positive message and approach.
And I guess the first thing what I hear is a lot of dimensions to look at, but I guess the first thing starts really with just the companies being aware of looking at all of the dimensions. That it's not only reward is not only financial. It's only one of the 6 dimensions. If I
indeed. And then a second trend, hybrid working, working from anywhere. And so I think that's the flexibility you offer to your employees is really a must. Employees are requiring for this flexibility. So you can also consider it as a benefit, as a non-financial benefit. But when we speak of working from anywhere, working from your home office, of course, it can also be in another country. And then we also need to reflect about the consequences of it, and tax security consequences. And also another aspect of people who work in another country than where the organization is based is also how we will reward these people. Will you pay them the same as that you will pay the employees who work in your headquarters, or will you make some differences for them? But it's based on the regional benchmarking aspect. So
so something not every team immediately reflects on, especially some of the tax social security consequences. Not everyone thinks about that when you think about hybrid work. So good example, I think.
And then another trend, technology revolution. So I think a lot of organizations introduce AI in their processes. So which also means for employees that they need to have new skills, capabilities, which also needs to be reflected in training, employees for acquiring these new skills. And the question also needs to be, how can you also link pay to it? How can you incentivize these people or reward people for using these technologies? And for example, a kind of premium can be a solution for that. And then a final big trend, as I may say, I think, is transparency. On one hand, employees are asking for more transparency on pay. People speak about pay. It's a trend. It's a lot of companies can confirm, or employers can confirm. But on the other hand, you also have the driver by the EU Pay Transparency Directive, where companies will be required to be transparent to their employees and need to report certain data.
Okay, it's interesting indeed that you mentioned the European Pay Transparency Directive. It's something that I hear a lot more companies asking questions about it, especially also if I have more contact with the HR department on the CSRD reporting as well. Like, I guess we can touch later on that, but clients are asking more and more questions on it. But for now, I understand it's only a directive and not getting too much into the technical stuff there, but a directive still for now at the European level. But could you share a bit more insight as to how we see that up and coming here?
Indeed, that's the directive that was actually adopted in 2023. And that means that in the second step, it still needs to be transposed to local legislation. That means every country in the EU will need to translate that directive. And I would say it's actually a minimum standard. We need to see, but there are some countries that will go a step further and be more severe in certain conditions. What makes, of course, a bit challenging for international groups to say, okay, which extent we need to report, we will take for everybody with the same standard, how we will report. So that's something to talk later about, perhaps. And we see already, and I think in Belgium, although Belgium has not yet implemented, we already see that the Brussels Walloon Federation already implemented it for its public institutions. So but then we see already some deviations. So that means already for Belgium, and not for all institutions, will have the same consequences. But I think you refer to, you received already some questions from an HR perspective. I think from a CRO perspective, I would say why it's a burning platform now, because it only needs to be, I would say, translated in legislation by 2026. Of course, if you have a pay gap, then you need to close it, and the pay gap you need to close it, that will be additional budget. And we know remuneration, because now we're talking about the financial part, that will have some costs and more time where you have to implement it or to close the gap. The better you can budget it, of course. And of course, you have now a bit more flexibility once the legislation is effective. Of course, you will be more in a framework, also with certain due dates. So what really say the moment is now to look at it.
Okay, no, definitely, and I hear already indeed some complexities in our small country. Okay, thanks for that. So Maxime, perhaps going back to you. So how should we now see it? I know Bart already touched on it slightly, but how should we see this impact with this new up and coming regulation on organizations?
So for organization, there are minimum standard requirements. So, and first of all, it starts with recruitment, which is new. So employers must provide pay information prior to the employment. So, like, for example, the pay ranges of the functions, they need to communicate it visible before the first conversation you have with the candidate. But also it's now new, and it's explicitly mentioned in the directive that it is now forbidden to request salary history to candidates. So companies really need to think about their recruitment process and inform their recruiters, of course. And also the business, for example, the finance manager who wants to hire a new finance profile, they need to be informed about this new directive. Further, what is also new is that employers must ensure transparency regarding pay levels and career paths. What does it mean is that employees should understand the criteria used to determine pay and salary increases and their promotion. Further, the directive also introduced the right to information, meaning that workers will have the right to request information about their average pay level of workers who are doing the same job or work of the same value. And then further, we also have the gender pay gap reporting. This only applies for companies with more than 100 workers. And once a company has a pay gap of more than 5%, then they must conduct a joint pay assessment with workers' representatives. And that assessment will be an in-depth review of the current pay structures of the company, also to determine the reasons, for example, for the gap. But it will also need to assess the effectiveness of already certain actions that the company has taken in the past.
Okay.
And then, finally, there's also really an important one is that various enforcement mechanisms and sanctions are foreseen by the directive. So, for example, there's a shift of burden of proof from employee to the employer if the employee can claim that they have suffered gender pay gap discrimination. So, and then if the employer cannot prove that they did not violate the rules, the employee can receive compensation, and including even back pay and related bonuses.
Okay, very extensive.
Again, if you need to go back and close the gap also interactively, again, I think a very costly situation. So certainly, again, important to look at it in time and to see what is the likelihood, what is at stake.
Well, the more you know now, the more you can anticipate in the future. And if I then hear indeed, starting with recruitment, educating our people that effectively go out there to do those job interviews and making sure that they know what they can do and say, is indeed important. But perhaps, because you mentioned on the reporting part, so companies over 100 workers need to report the pay gap information, but assuming does this directive apply to every employee, every company? Is there sort of application at a consolidated level? How does that work?
Yeah, it applies to every company, big, small companies. The gender pay gap only applies, and reporting on it only applies for companies with more than 100 employees, but all the rest applies for every organization, private, public, and it also applies to all your workers. And so workers is the employees who you have an employment if we use with full-time, part-time. So in principle, self-employed consultants will not fall under the directive. But on the other hand, it would be, it's also not, I think, the purpose of the directive that now you will have self-employed consultants to avoid the directive. So that you also need to consider. How companies need to report on this, or how, I think the directive is applicable for each company, on a company level, legal entity-wise. But of course, company can also do the exercise on a consolidated level, but at that they decide to do it, they need to take into account that EU directive will be implemented in each EU country, and it will have its own rules as they can deviate from the standard EU directive rules.
So you really have the potential that this is going to be a lot of data points, legal entity, country, various pay schemes. So we need a lot of data points to provide to those employees, and to also check, I would say, internally before you provide that it's the correct data, and then that there's the necessary checks and balances, reconciliations, etc. in there. So perhaps how, and we've already spoken about anticipation. So how do you see companies preparing for that at this moment? Where are some of their attention points or focus areas? And perhaps also at the very end, and how does finance get involved?
That's a very good question, Yvonne. And in principle, we see, of course, that clients of different companies are at different maturity levels. But as soon as you start and refer to the massive amount of data points and data as such, that you see, of course, it all starts with how mature is your system? How do you capture it? Is it from different sources? It's already centralized or not? So there you see already the difference in maturity level. But assume now that you would be at a very low maturity level. Our typically approach would be first, of course, create awareness and also on terms of leadership to know, okay, something's coming up. We'll ask some resources, we will ask some budget to make sure that you are ready when legislation is there. And then, of course, it starts really looking at the HR data and structuring it, making also that it's compliant. But it goes even further. In one sense that you have, of course, the data, but the other side also your structure. So you have grading structure, a job classification. We noticed from recent experience that a lot it's not been recently updated. So then that structure is not right. Then it could trigger some difficulties. So that's certainly something you also look at. And of course, once we have the data, the awareness, we can already do, if we talk about being proactive, we can do a readiness assessment and already high level to say, okay, where you have potential gaps, some outliers that you can already look at. And then, of course, you can already start remediation. Now you can do it, I would say, between brackets on a voluntary basis. Once, of course, legislation is there, it will not be on a voluntary basis. And also within our team, in our reward team, we also have a focus, of course, on the tax and legal aspects. The policy will be important. So you have sometimes a bonus policy, a car policy. Well, now you will also have a pay transparency policy. You will need, of course, to inform employees what are their rights, what are the procedures. So that's also something to put in place. And then the last step is, of course, the reporting. And then Maxime referred already to. And I think that's, of course, the last step. And especially if you're not, I would say, meeting to close the gap, you have some reporting obligations.
Okay. And speaking about reporting, we've touched upon it on an earlier podcast already as well, that CSRD is up and coming. Also, a big line of reporting, which also has the social angle in there. So large companies reporting on non-financial information. Are there links between the two, and are things that companies need to consider in the overlap?
Yeah, sure. A very good question. I think if I would need to summarize it, I would say pay transparency is rather the duty to act, although it also has reporting obligation, while CSRD is more the duty to report.
Yeah.
And of course, in both legislations, there is a duty to report on pay gap and on pay data. And when you're preparing actually for CSRD, you will, under the S1, you will need to report average pay levels, for instance. For the Pay Transparency Directive, it goes even a bit further. So you also have medians, etc. So it would be good. Sometimes you get the message, okay, you want to first be compliant with CSRD, and then we'll see what next. But actually, I think a good approach would be to look already at certain things together. And as if you already look to I would say, the closing element of Pay Transparency, that you have the reporting, that's already an important one. So again, I would say no excuse to wait, and both are, of course, linked as such.
No, it's good. The moment you start reporting on CSRD, the data is somehow out there already. It has been vetted, hopefully, but it's out there, and public information is hard to take back then.
Yes, and perhaps also good what also Maxime indicated, Pay Transparency will be applicable to all companies.
Yeah.
But of course, if you're referring to CSRD, there you have, of course, the double materiality test. It will not immediately be at all companies. So that's a bit a difference in scope. So the scope for the number of companies is, of course, much larger with the companies of the Pay Transparency Directive.
Okay.
That also just to point out.
No, very, very good. And then obviously, if you talk about reporting, and especially on CSRD, but I always immediately talk of finance, and I think a lot of people, given the skill set they have in terms of data collection, vetting the data, going through, controlling it, which I have often seen is something that they can add a lot of value to on these processes as well, on numerous instances, in reconciling just all the data sets. But are there, I think I've heard a few other links where I would expect a modern CFO or a modern finance department to really be taking the loop on these matters, but perhaps good to look at that, where you see some angles for them.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So, starting from any changes to your reward strategy, or even the introduction of the pay transparency, and if there is a gap and that you need to compensate, it will also have impact on your finance, which means that also your finance team needs to be aware of, and any changes, it can also have an impact from the tax and social security perspective. So what I could say, and also to the listeners, the finance team can definitely assist the HR or campaign team in assessing these implications and managing a relationship with unions and workers, of course. So, and also finally, as a CEO or a finance manager, you also want to attract and retain top talent, top finance profiles. So, and a well-balanced and transparent reward strategy can help you become an employer of choice. So, and it's really important that you also support this strategy and also communicate it to your team now.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your time, because I think this almost brings us up to speed, and at the end of the at the of the session. So thanks a lot, Maxime. Thanks a lot, Bart.
You're welcome.
Here. I would say in personal takeaway, I've heard the new reward models really being set up. So that offers a lot of opportunity, but a lot of in combination with the Gender Pay Gap Directive or Pay Transparency Directive, offers a lot of complexity in reporting, a lot of data points. So offering a compelling reward is, I think, very interesting towards especially employees, but also to companies, but offers a lot of complexity, I would say, to for companies as well. And I definitely retain that the sooner you start with, parallel perhaps in with CSRD, the better you probably are off in the future. That's not too best to delay until the last moment. So the organizations, if they prepare, create awareness, probably are better off in the future. So, and especially with all the financial implications it could also have. So thanks a lot for being here, and definitely, and noting that the Pay Transparency Directive is also discussed in your reward book, which I find compelling reward and attracting talent, a very interesting book. So I'll make sure to also put it in the speaker notes, so that people that if they are interested, they can have a look.
Yes, certainly reach out. So happy to guide them through it and to provide a copy.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.